Today, we're giving you our top 30 rookie rankings, and we're going to include tiers because, Dave, tiers are important when you get into your rookie draft. It's not just about who you would put ahead, but maybe who's the last guy in a tier. How do you get that value? When do you know that you need to trade down? What do you do for tiebreakers if there's two players at the same position, different positions? We're going to talk about all of that today. But first, I have to let everyone know we've got a big announcement. We have a new YouTube channel.
Big.
New YouTube channel coming just for this show and similar fantasy football content starting next Monday. For some reason, they're allowing us to have our own channel. And starting next week, we're going to be giving you more rookie content, best ball mock drafts, best ball live drafts, redraft mock drafts. We're going to be giving you rankings in season. We're coming back again with waiver wire, trade targets, Sunday morning live start sit. We're going to be giving you episodes all throughout the fantasy football season. So make sure you find that. It's going to be YouTube Football Guys Fantasy Football. Okay, so you go on YouTube, Football Guys Fantasy Football, you'll be able to find that. This current channel is going to become the Audible, okay, with Sigmund Bloom, Cecil Lammy, and then we're also going to have the Football Guys Dynasty Football channel. Okay, so make sure you search on YouTube, Football Guys Fantasy Football. Dave, let's get into our first tier of rookies here. And just to let everyone know, we're doing this as if it were rookie draft rankings, super flex, and then there's no tight end premium. We're not really splitting hairs between PPR, half PPR. We're just going to give you kind of a super flex rookie ranking. So at number one, I think this is kind of where everyone is going to have it. Caleb Williams, and that starts our elite tier. That's what we're calling it here, the elite tier. At 2, Marvin Harrison Jr., and then at 3, Jayden Daniels. And I think I speak for everybody that the Marvin Harrison Jr., Jayden Daniels thing is kind of just, it's a tie. It's really just pick your preference there. So what I'm going to ask you, Dave, is when we figure out the second pick, does this come down to just needing a starting quarterback? How are you making that second pick?
No, I don't think the team needs really matter all that much in Dynasty. This point in the season, you are just trying to take the best value available, and then you can figure out team needs as you get closer to the season. For example, I'm in a Dynasty league where I have Patrick Mahomes already, and then I have kind of just this slew of QB2s that I rotate through with Baker Mayfield and some other guys. And I took Drake Maye and JJ McCarthy. I don't have a need for quarterback, but the idea is that, if these guys play well, you can flip them before the season or in season for positional needs. So it's kind of weird. I've seen a lot of people, I've done 7 rookie drafts so far, and Marvin Harrison has gone number 1 in 5 of those 7.
Wow.
Which is kind of crazy to me. I think whether you've got a need or not, Caleb Williams, if he hits his absolute high-end range of outcomes, is going to be worth significantly more than Marvin Harrison. So I think, and again, this is kind of how we've got the tier set up with these 3, but I'm even taking Jayden Daniels, regardless of positional need, ahead of Marvin Harrison. So for me, it's Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, Marvin Harrison. There's almost no way that I'm budging off of that top 3 in that order.
That's where I think you and I, right here off the top, we will differentiate. I think we both have Caleb Williams 1. I'm going Marvin Harrison 2 here. If I'm sitting at the 2 spot, unless I have this desperate need for quarterback, and I do see. Listen, there is the world, right, where Jayden Daniels is another Lamar Jackson. He is another prolific quarterback that can change things for your team. I just believe that Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of those can't miss generational wide receiver prospects. And being on the Cardinals, seeing what happens to a wide receiver 1 on the Cardinals and how that target volume just changes things. We're talking about a guy who's going to probably consistently be a top 5, top 6 wide receiver every year. Like, he could be joining Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase as soon as next season. So for me, that's where my value leans. But honestly, I can't really fight anyone if they want to take Jayden Daniels over Marvin Harrison there.
And for me, it's the rushing output, and we've talked about that a lot. I think some of the reasons there were some concerns about Jayden Daniels pre-draft were like maybe he'd slide, maybe he'd go to 3 and end up with the Patriots. But now that we've checked the box that he is in a good landing spot with a good supporting cast, we know he's got the long ball. We know he's got the rushing output as well. He's absolutely deserving of a top 3 pick.
Yeah, I get that. I'm not going to push back hard on that. I think the only thing I might say is that I feel much more strongly that 5 years from now, we're looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. as being one of the most prolific players in the league, which also I'm just pulling that out of my butt here. Like, it's just, we're just saying things to say them. We haven't seen these players play in the NFL. Whereas Jayden Daniels, I do think there's slightly larger margin or room for error there, or a guy that does need to develop. Whereas Marvin Harrison, such a clean prospect. Now, before we go to tier number 2, I want to let you guys know we have a giveaway going on right here. Another promo. We did this last week. We're doing another giveaway here, but this one's really cool. This is totally different than anything we've done in the past. We are giving away spots in the Fort Lauderdale and Denver Scott Fishbowl live drafts where you can draft with either myself or Dave. Now, you don't have to be local. If you want to fly down from somewhere or drive from somewhere and be in our drafts, you absolutely can, but there is a spot reserved for you. This is how you can win it. All you have to do is leave a review on Apple or Spotify and send a screenshot of that review to abrown@footballguys.com. Once again, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, screenshot that, send it to abrown@footballguys.com. I'll leave the directions in the comments below and the description for the podcast, okay? You send that over to me, and we are going to announce the winner next Monday on our brand new channel. Okay, and if you're not subscribed to it, make sure you go and subscribe to the new channel. That'll be also in the description and in the comments down below. Make sure to subscribe to that. And when we release our episode next week, we will announce the winner over there.
And I got to say,
Dave,
Denver and Fort
yeah.
Lauderdale, pretty good tourist spots. Like we're not asking you to come out to like Oklahoma or, something like that. Like Denver and Fort
No
Collins.
shade at
There's
Oklahoma,
Denver
man.
and Fort Lauderdale. I'm just saying, I've got a lot of people. I'm hosting the event out here in Denver. You're hosting the event in Fort Lauderdale. And I know in Denver, we've got a lot of people coming from all around the country for this event. It's going to be a really, really fun time.
Poor Oklahoma. They were just sitting there doing nothing, and you just had to hit them with that. All right, let's get to tier number 2, and I'm calling this one wide receiver ones no matter what. And this is where we've got Malik Nabers, who was drafted by the Giants, and Rome Odunze, who was drafted by the Bears. And for some, they're interchangeable. I'd say most people lean towards Nabers over Odunze. Dave, I know that's where you lean. So what's your philosophy when choosing Nabers over Odunze here?
For me, it's just that he has a much cleaner path to relevancy. Obviously, his quarterback situation isn't quite as good. We don't even know if it's going to be Daniel Jones or Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito. We don't know what's going on in New York, but we do know that he is going to be the clear-cut wide receiver one. Darren Waller, we're hearing some rumors that he's not going to be playing next year. Saquon Barkley is out of the picture. This reminds me very much so of Garrett Wilson, where Garrett Wilson had terrible quarterback play as a rookie and still was able to rack up over 1,100 yards and have a good fantasy season. I think we see the same type of thing for Malik Nabers. Rome Odunze, you can make the argument that he is going to have a better first 5 years in the league, and I want to push back on that at all. I think that's very possible that he can do so, but right now his path to relevancy is going to be pretty tough, being on a team with, one, a rookie quarterback, and we know rookie quarterbacks struggle to support multiple fantasy weapons. He's also got DJ Moore and Keenan Allen ahead of him. Cole Kmet is going to be there taking some targets as well. So for me, it comes down to who's probably going to score more points in 2024, and I'm going to lean pretty easily towards Malik Nabers there. If anything, I'd say to draft Malik Nabers at 105, or I'm sorry, at 104. And then if you want Rome Odunze as well, wait until midseason or wait until next offseason. Hopefully he can dip a little bit in value. We just saw Jackson Smith-Njigba go from being the wide receiver 9 in Dynasty before he ever took an NFL snap, and now he's the wide receiver 26 in Dynasty. So I can't guarantee that Rome Odunze is going to follow that similar trajectory, but it seems somewhat likely.
So for me, the difference is I love the fact that Rome Odunze is paired with Caleb Williams. I love the fact that I know what's going to be happening here over the next 4 years. These guys are on contracts together. They're going into rookie minicamp together. I know there's probably not the same level of target volume in his rookie season, but I'm okay with that. I mean, we've seen the other side of, instead of Garrett Wilson, let's go to the other side of that coin where Drake London took years to be relevant, right? Like that, it does happen. These are opposite ends of the spectrum. And Rome Odunze, while he may not get the type of volume, and this is all contingent upon players being healthy, right? Like there's also a good chance he is the best wide receiver on that team, better than DJ Moore. Keenan Allen is currently third. It's very possible. Like Rome Odunze is a much better prospect than DJ Moore ever was, right? Like I
think
know
the biggest thing is that he will probably come off of the field for 3 wide receiver sets. And I think that's what concerns, or off the field for 2 wide receiver sets. I think that's the problem, is we're probably going to be looking at somewhere between like a 50-65% snap share. And it's
maybe
really
not
fantasy relevant there.
Maybe not, but that's also just looking at year 1. I'm trying to look at years 2, 3, 4 as we go along with this, especially because when people draft wide receivers in their rookie draft, they draft them for the long term. Like if we were concerned more about the short term, then just go with running backs, right? Like get the guys whose value die really quick. Whereas with Rome Odunze, I really like the long-term value here. Keenan Allen is 31, 32? He's got 1 year left on this deal.
This year. Yep.
32 this year. He's probably not coming back after this 1-year deal. Rome Odunze instantly becomes, at worst, the wide receiver 2 on a team that is going to have Caleb Williams, who's going to have a good rapport with him. Whereas I know we talked about this in our NFL draft recap show. Is like, I get worried. I know you say there's some excitement with Drew Lock slinging the ball, right? Or Daniel Jones' best season as an NFL quarterback was 15
3,200 yards.
touchdowns.
Yeah.
Yeah. 3,200 yards, 15 touchdowns. Like, it's not great. And so you take him out of the equation, that it's it's Drew Lock. You take both of them out of the equation, and we're just talking about a whole new rebuild with another rookie quarterback. And then teams do this all the time. Well, our offense is really stagnant. We need to surround our new rookie quarterback with more players. And they go and they sign a wide receiver. They draft a wide receiver. They draft a tight end. They get the pass catching running back. And all of a sudden, we're not looking at the volume from Malik Nabers. So I like both these guys. I think they're both in less than ideal situations for their rookie year. In this case, I will stick with the guy that I had ranked higher as a prospect, and that's Rome Odunze. And I think the tiebreaker there is just simply having Caleb Williams for the future going forward.
And that's fair. And I preferred Neighbors as a prospect. So that's why I'm kind of sticking to my guns here, because I think that the knocks to
Right.
both of their situations, knock them down similarly, where one doesn't have a quarterback, one is surrounded with really good playmakers. It is impossible to project what situations are going to look like beyond 1 year. So right now
Yeah.
we're saying, yeah, it's terrible for Rome Odunze or for Malik Neighbors, and we expect that Caleb Williams is going to be good. But what if Caleb Williams isn't that good? And what if next offseason the Giants go out and bring in Dak Prescott or something like that? Then all of a sudden this whole narrative is flipped completely on its head.
100%.
So you're really splitting hairs between the two. I
Yeah.
prefer Neighbors as a talent, so I'm going to take him ahead. But you really can't go wrong with these guys. And honestly, if I'm sitting at 104 and I could trade back to 105, pick up a third round pick or something like that, and just let my league mate make the decision for me, I'm A-okay doing that because these guys are so close in value.
And that's exactly why tiers matter. Because if you can get the same quality of receiver or a guy that you're equally as comfortable with at pick 5 and it's still within that tier, this is why you do it. This is why you set up
Mhm.
the rookie rankings this way. Oh, man, just thinking of Drew Lock slinging the ball this season. It's exciting. All right, let's go to tier number 3. We're at 6 and 7. We've got the situation dependent quarterbacks. And both of us really liked Drake Maye as a prospect. We
Yep.
had him ahead of JJ McCarthy. And at least right now, for these rankings, we've got them in the same tier. Let me just double check. We both still have Drake Maye ranked ahead of JJ McCarthy. I know
6
a
and
lot of
7 for me.
people.
I think we were in
Yeah,
lockstep
6 and
pretty much
7.
through
Yep.
here outside of a few, one-offs flipped.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have now moved JJ McCarthy ahead of Drake Maye because of the landing spot.
Yeah.
And I can get it. I can understand it. I can value that opinion because it is a very good situation. It's Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson. It's a good offensive system. We saw Josh Dobbs do well there. But I also see this too. JJ McCarthy is a guy who has never really had a lot of passing volume in college. He's never been that Kirk Cousins throwing the ball 40, 45 times in a game. This is a guy who's always, if you go back to 2022, Drake Maye had more completions in college than JJ McCarthy had attempts.
Yep.
And then on top of that, you could say, well, JJ McCarthy's really athletic. He'll run, right? Drake Maye outrushed him every single year.
Mm-hmm.
So I get it. I get the hype. I get that there are people that like the intangibles for JJ McCarthy. I get that there are people that like the landing spot for JJ McCarthy. I'm still going to stick with the guy that I think is supremely talented. I think that's what it comes down to, is that Drake Maye is just really, really good. The Patriots are going to invest everything around him. And yeah, he might not start for like the first 6 games. The same could be possible for JJ McCarthy. And these guys could both just kind of have a wash of a rookie season. And you're looking at who's going to be better long-term, who's going to be more dynamic. It could very easily be Drake Maye. And once again, I'm sticking with the guy that I had rated higher and hoping that this team continues to build around him. Whereas the Vikings, some of their guys are getting a little bit older. There's some money questions here and there. There are things that could tip and change. I don't know, Dave. What's the tiebreaker for you between these guys?
Just that I think Drake Maye is a better talent. That's really what it
Yeah,
comes down to
I
for
think
me.
it's that simple.
Yeah, and I think the tiebreaker for me, really why I prefer Drake Maye ahead of JJ McCarthy, and I just had this conversation briefly with Andy Behrens on Twitter when I shared a screenshot, like I said, where I took Drake Maye and JJ McCarthy, and I did take Drake Maye first, and he said he thought that was kind of crazy that I took Maye
Yeah, I
ahead of
saw.
McCarthy. And what I said for me is that the tiebreaker is that I think Drake Maye starts more in 2024, and I think that's really a lot of the times when I look at guys as similar prospects, for me, it comes down to what are you going to do for me immediately? And I think Drake Maye has a quicker path to relevancy in 2024. Drake Maye or JJ McCarthy might not play in 2024. I think that they're somewhat confident in Sam Darnold. They might just trot out Darnold for the whole year. Maybe we see some spot starts at the end of the season from McCarthy. Maybe we see that with Jacoby Brissett as well. Trying to read the tea leaves here, it's really tough to get a read on either of these situations. But for me, I think Drake Maye is a better quarterback. And I think that he is more likely to play more games in 2024. And yeah, the situation right now is better for JJ McCarthy, but I'm not willing to overreact that much to the situation because, as we just talked about with Malik Nabers and Odunze, situations are really tough to predict long term. Like you said, these guys are getting older. And right now we're saying the situation when trying to tout JJ McCarthy, but God forbid TJ Hawkinson injures himself again. Justin Jefferson leaves in free agency. Then what? We're excited because JJ McCarthy is throwing to Jordan Addison as wide receiver one in 2025. It's just so tough to project situation long term that I try my best not to fall into that trap.
Yeah, and that's honestly, I think we're both kind of doing that here with the quarterbacks, and we're both doing that with those top wide receivers. Is just not necessarily sticking to our guns and not paying attention to draft capital and landing spot, but it's figuring out how we value the actual talent over landing spot because so much can change, right? JJ McCarthy has a bad year, and Justin Jefferson's like, dude, get me out of here. Like,
Yep.
I'm done with this, right? It's within the realm of possibility. Let's go to tier number 4, where we've got numbers 8, 9, and 10. We got Brock Bowers, number 8, tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders. 9, Brian Thomas, wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And at 10, Xavier Worthy, wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. And we all
You're
know the
still perfectly
story.
in lockstep through here, even the same order, I
Yeah.
believe, right? Yep.
Yeah. 8, 9, 10, straight through, man. Yeah. So right now
And this is
we're
after
pretty much in
these
agreement.
3 is where there is a big tier fall off. So again,
Yes.
we'll get into
Yes.
that. I mean, we're talking tiers obviously in this show, but this is where you want to be. You wanna have one of these picks because after here, it's not that you can't hit. I mean, there are still going to be some good players, but, after 110 is I think where you say, "Ooh, things are getting a little bit murky here." So you wanna try to trade inside the top 10 if you can.
I almost think there's like a little mini tier for the next 3 players that we have
Mhm.
after these guys, 11, 12, 13, because they could all potentially, not all, but you're rotating who could be in that first round. But let's talk about these guys. These are the pass catching playmakers that we're looking at here. And Brock Bowers goes, I believe, was pick 13 to the Las Vegas Raiders, and it was very surprising to people. But if you know Tom Telesco, you've seen what he's been doing throughout the years. He just gets best player available. He takes these guys that are playmakers. He has always done that. It was not surprising to me. What is surprising though is that it was a tight end, that it was Brock Bowers, that they already have Michael Mayer on this team. And I think for a lot of us, maybe Brock Bowers was going a bit higher before this. I think it's a very small drop off, and you're not necessarily dropping Bowers because of the landing spot. You're not dropping him anymore because of the landing spot
Mhm.
because you don't really know what you're getting with these wide receivers. Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, these are guys that probably going to be the third target on their team, right? So you've got this blue chip tight end that has sort of a sketchy quarterback situation, but it's likely he's going to be used a ton in very creative ways versus high potential wide receivers with good to elite quarterback play when we're talking about Xavier Worthy with Patrick Mahomes. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you this question. You're at pick 108. You're sitting there. You're looking at Bowers, Thomas, Worthy. Is Bowers the auto draft for you here, or are there concerns that make you maybe skip him and go with one of these wide receivers?
No, it's Bowers for me. I mean, he was the first one drafted in the draft, so that kind of tells us how NFL teams feel about him. So it's pretty easily Bowers for me. Yeah, you've got Devontae Adams there, but he's going to his age 32 season. The end is probably near. Yeah, there's some quarterback concerns as well, but we know it usually takes a few years for tight ends to ramp up anyway. And Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid and Trey McBride, they may have bucked that trend over the last couple of years, but we still want to exercise patience when we draft a tight end. And I think that if you're you're drafting Brock Bowers, you're not saying, I hope I can plug this guy in as a top 3 tight end in 2024. You're saying, I hope this guy can be one of the premier tight ends in the league 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road from now. And that's what you're drafting him for. So I'm taking Bowers pretty easily here. And then again, we've talked a lot so far on the show about not overreacting to landing spot. And while Brian Thomas Jr. and Xavier Worthy both got good landing spots, I think you and I both like them as prospects as well. And I hope that we're not just going back to the well, stepping on the rake again, as you like to say with Xavier Worthy, because we did this with Sky Moore, and we did this with Kadarius Toney, and we did this with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But I think when it comes to Xavier Worthy, you and I are both big fans of the talent. He's much more than just a straight line burner. And then kind of looking, that is one of the few spots where you can kind of project long term. Patrick Mahomes isn't going anywhere. He's under contract through 2029 or 2030, I believe. So he's going to be in Kansas City for a long, long time. And if Xavier Worthy is the player we think he is, his skill set matches up so well with Patrick Mahomes.
So I think I'm kind of reading the tea leaves here on what you're saying. If you have the pick, I mean, we both have Thomas ranked higher than Worthy. Yeah. And I don't know how much of that is just draft capital, or maybe he's got, less of a challenge to targets. I'm not sure where that is for us. I think it's just he was the better prospect and he got the better draft capital. I think that's why we're leaning that direction. But same question, you're on the clock, pick 9. You're sitting there looking at Brian Thomas or Xavier Worthy, which Xavier Worthy, not the same type of prospect that Sky Moore was, right? Like when we get nervous about that stuff, not the same prospect that Rashee Rice was, and we saw success there. And I don't think we need to be too worried about Marquise Brown being a guy long-term over there in Kansas City, or Travis Kelce being there long-term in Kansas City. I think at most you're looking at Kelce having 1 to 2 years left on that team. So there's a path for Xavier Worthy to be the top guy eventually. There's a path for Brian Thomas to be a top guy over there. Christian Kirk has not really been a wide receiver 1 on the teams he's at. Evan Ingram's getting a little bit older. I know there's a contract, but each of these guys could really carve out a role where they're the top target on their team, just big downfield threats. Who would you go with in that situation?
Yeah, for me, it's Brian Thomas, and I'll just say it. I defer to draft capital so often, and a lot of people say that's a cop-out, but, I put in the work before free agency, and I have fun speculating about the NFL draft, and I love doing that, but at the end of the day, for us to act like we know more than NFL GMs is just foolish. We don't.
Sometimes we do.
I mean, sometimes we get it right, but overall, these guys know more than we do. And if they're going to invest a premium draft pick in a guy like Brian Thomas, it would be silly to ignore that. Similarly, you and I both really liked Adonai Mitchell. But the way he fell in the draft, where every NFL team was willing to pass on him multiple times, it would be foolish of us to ignore that and think that we know better than 32 NFL GMs. So, again, a lot of people are going to say this is a cop-out, and I know a lot of analysts lean on draft capital and are unwilling to admit it. I have no problem saying it with my chest. I lean on draft capital because it turns out these NFL teams typically know what they're doing, and if they invest premium draft capital in a player, they'll often have big plans for that player. So I think in a vacuum, I may have liked Xavier Worthy just about as much as Brian Thomas, but we saw Jacksonville reach for Brian Thomas earlier than Kansas City was willing to reach for Xavier Worthy. So for me, that's the deciding factor. Give me Thomas over Worthy.
I also lean Thomas over Worthy. I do think draft capital matters there. I do think that there's a little more pressure for Brian Thomas to be used immediately in that Jacksonville Jaguars offense. I know people are going to argue that Rashee Rice is going to have his suspension and Travis Kelce's getting older and da-da-da-da-da. Still, there's
Mahomes just won a Super Bowl with a bunch of plumbers as his backup wide receivers. Like, it really doesn't matter when you're Patrick Mahomes.
There might be a few scripted plays for Xavier Worthy in his first year that doesn't necessarily make a starting fantasy wide receiver in year 1. That's not me saying it can't get there. That's not me saying he can't eventually be the top receiver for this team. But there's a little bit of overlap in what Marquise Brown does and what Xavier Worthy does. And the profiles are kind of similar too. We're talking about a very slight guy, a thin guy, a small guy. Whereas Brian Thomas Jr., and I hate to do this because this is not typically how I even scout players, but he's got a bit more of that alpha profile, that alpha size, a guy who could actually be the top receiver for his team. Whereas I don't know if that's there for Xavier Worthy. And so I think I'm going to be leaning more towards the fact that the Jaguars absolutely have to use Brian Thomas in a similar Calvin Ridley role to last year. By the way, just this needs to be said. I'm not worried about Gabe Davis.
No,
I'm not.
No,
No.
not at all,
All
not at
right.
all. And we
Good.
talked about it. I think we talked about it. I don't know. We did so much recording over this weekend. I can't remember what was said on air and what was just said while we were watching.
Right.
But Brian Thomas, his skill set works so well with what they currently have, where Christian
Yeah.
Kirk kind of takes those intermediate routes, Evan Ingram takes the underneath routes, and Brian Thomas is going to be the guy that gets deep. So I think that we could see Brian Thomas immediately make an impact where right now, pretty much everything Xavier Worthy does, Marquise Brown does as well. So it might take some time for him to kind of jump the pecking order a little bit, where Brian Thomas could be an immediate contributor week 1 this year.
Let's get to tier number 5. And I called this draft capital matters, because these are the players that maybe we're not sure about.
Yeah.
Maybe the positional value is not there. Maybe the positional value says that you take them higher. But overall, these are guys that got some pretty good draft capital. So let's go through this one. At 11, we've got Jonathan Brooks, running back for the Carolina Panthers. At 12, Lad McConkey, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Chargers. 13, Ricky Pearsall, wide receiver for the Niners. Keon Coleman at 14, wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. At 15 and 16, we've got Bo Nix, quarterback for the Broncos, and Michael Penix Jr., quarterback for the Falcons. And then we close out this tier with Xavier Legette, wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. And I mean, there was no other name I could call this except for draft capital matters. Jonathan Brooks is the first running back. Lad McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, Keon Coleman, Xavier Legette all get taken that end of first, early second. And not all of them have ideal landing spots or complete profiles that give them the ability to produce right now. And then you got the two quarterbacks, Bo Nix and Michael Penix, who drafted within the top 12. Nix might start week 1. Penix might not start till year 5. Like, we have no idea what is going on with these guys. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you here. You get to pick 11. You're seeing these wide receivers on the board. You're seeing a running back like Jonathan Brooks who could be there. I know you don't tend to value running backs as high as maybe I would, but I think there's a very reasonable case here for Jonathan Brooks to go at pick 11 ahead of guys like McConkey, Pearsall, Coleman, etc., because he's going to be that top running back in Carolina. I don't think Dave Canales trades up for this guy, and we've seen the usage he gives to guys like Ken Walker as a rookie, Rashad White in his second year in Tampa. He looks for workhorses, and Brooks has that 3-down ability.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally am buying that. I get it. Jonathan Brooks, number 1 running back in this class. I defer to Lad McConkey at 11 ever so slightly, just because we were both really big
Is it
fans of
because he's
his game.
scrappy?
Yeah, he's scrappy, all those things, but he's a good player and he got an ideal landing spot. I mean, this is a team in Los Angeles that we just saw trade away Keenan Allen, let Mike Williams walk, let Gerald Everett walk, let Austin Eckler walk. I mean, there's nobody there. Lad McConkey is, you look at all of these guys, obviously Marvin Harrison, Malik Nabers, they have a chance to lead their team in targets. I think the only guy that you can make a strong case for to lead his team in targets as a rookie is Lad McConkey. And yeah, they might throw a little bit less with Jim Harbaugh, but he's still catching passes from Justin Herbert. He profiles as a slot receiver that can do a lot more. Dare I say it, we see him in that Keenan Allen role that was so lucrative last year, in the same role that CeeDee Lamb was in over previous years, where they are just using Lad McConkey as a weapon, putting him in motion pre-snap, lining him inside, outside, deep, short, kind of doing a little bit of everything. So I like Lad McConkey slightly ahead of Jonathan Brooks. And if Jonathan Brooks was coming off of a clean bill of health and didn't have the ACL tear, we probably would have seen him go late first, maybe even earlier in the second round. And in that point, I might consider Jonathan Brooks ahead of Lad McConkey. But right now, with the combination of Jonathan Brooks coming off the injury, Lad McConkey with the ideal landing spot being tied to a good quarterback, I'm going to lean ever so slightly to McConkey.
There's one thing that does worry me slightly with McConkey, and it's tough for us when we try to predict injuries and we try to predict medical stuff going
Oh, yeah.
forward.
He's
All we
made it
can do is
last.
really, yeah, all we can really do is look back. And McConkey missed 5 games last year. He's never been a guy that had the big production profile at Georgia. I think what got him here and what got everybody to like him was the film guys won in this. The film guys won in saying that McConkey's really good.
Mhm.
And the NFL also vouched and said McConkey's really good. Problem is that he's been surrounded by a bunch of other playmakers. He was surrounded by, I believe at one point it was George Pickens, Adonai Mitchell, like that
Yep,
that
yep.
Georgia team was just stacked everywhere. And
Catching passes from Stetson Bennett.
right. Well, I mean, we saw Brock Bowers really show out doing
Yeah.
that, and that was fine. But the problem with McConkey is all the injuries over the years, and it's not like it hasn't even been the same injury. It's not like a chronic thing. It's just been a lot of stuff. It's been back, it's been ankle, it's been knee, it's been a little bit of everything. And so that kind of worries me just a smidge, which is why I would probably take Brooks over him, which is ironic because Brooks is coming off an injury himself. Um, I think it's just one of those things where Brooks might have the clearer path as a rookie. I do genuinely believe you don't go and trade up and draft this guy to be like, all right, we're going to split carries with Miles Sanders, who got beat by Chuba Hubbard, and Chuba Hubbard, who got beat by Deontay Foreman the year before. This Jonathan Brooks is Dave Canales' guy. Where I think that when we talk about the tiers and players who are similar, I think there's some pretty similar value here when it comes to McConkey, Pearsall, Coleman. Each of these guys, maybe not Pearsall, especially not in year one, but each of these guys, probably not Coleman. Okay, I just talked myself out of it. McConkey is the guy who would lead his team, but I think that the long term value is there for each of them.
I think the most
Let's talk.
interesting guys in this tier are Bo Nix and Michael Penix, and I think is that where you were going next? All right,
That's exactly where I was going next, because this is so interesting to me, because I think we all agree Bo Nix is probably the worst out of these quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round.
You know who doesn't
But
agree
he's,
though? Sean
I
Payton, and
know,
that's all that
yeah,
matters.
sure, Sean Payton, he never gets anything wrong. But the thing here is that Bo Nix is probably going to start week one.
Yeah.
His competition is Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham.
Mhm.
And I loved the joke that I heard that the Broncos went into before the draft, before last week, the Broncos had Jarrett Stidham, then they added Zach, and that was their best quarterback. They added Zach Wilson, then they added Bo Nix, and Jarrett Stidham is still their best quarterback. That was Ben Solak of The Ringer who said that. And I think that's funny, man. But like, I also think there's a very real world here where Bo Nix is all of a sudden starting week one. And we're looking at a guy in a Sean Payton system who Payton was
Mhm.
very comfortable with. And Payton really, really liked him. They did the same thing that every team does. They comment, this was our number 2, number 3 quarterback on the board ahead
I
of some of
believe it
these other
though.
guys.
Cecil's been saying this for weeks.
Yes, I believe it too. It doesn't make it right, but I believe that Sean Payton believes it,
Mhm.
which tells me that Bo Nix is probably going to start week one. And Bo Nix now has a guy that he's been comfortable with, Troy Franklin. He's got Marvin Mims as a playmaker. They've got Cortland Sutton, who has just been the guy there forever. It's not a good roster, but there's pieces where Bo Nix is relevant and a system where he could thrive. Whereas Michael Penix, I think a lot of us might say he's better. A lot of us are happy with the draft capital he got, but we're sitting here saying, yikes, he could sit for 3 years. So
Yeah.
how do you break that tie? Like, how do you pick who you're actually going to draft there? Because when we're talking about a 3-year sit window for Michael Penix, I don't think we can just say talent, and the weapons are better, because 3 years is a long time, dude. I don't know. I don't remember what I was doing 3 years ago.
But it might not be 3 years. I mean, they've got kind of an out built into the contract after 2 years where they can let Kirk Cousins go. But also, like, what if Penix, when Kirk Cousins is rehabbing from this Achilles injury in summer camp, what if Penix just comes in and builds immediate chemistry with all the guys? It would be crazy to bench a guy that they're paying $100+ million. But also, what if Kirk Cousins, going into his age 36 season, re-injures himself? Like there's so many ways that Penix, we immediately assume the best, that everybody's going to play healthy and that Kirk Cousins is going to be good. But what if Kirk Cousins just like doesn't pick up the new offense? And what if his injury doesn't heal as well as he is? And again, these are all what ifs, but this is kind of where I live in Dynasty, is in the what ifs. I don't try to project what's going to happen years and years down the road. Michael Penix was drafted 8th overall. That is a ridiculous investment
Yeah.
to make in a quarterback. So maybe even after this year, Penix comes out, looks good for a couple of weeks. Kirk Cousins looks good for a couple of weeks. Maybe they try to trade Kirk Cousins after the season. There's so many ways that Penix can become a starter before 2027, like we're all projecting. And it could happen this year. It could happen next year. It might happen 2 or 3 years down the road. But you don't draft a guy just to have him sit that long. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. This is a really good situation. You and I don't remember exactly how you feel about Penix. I think that he's a pretty good quarterback, but at the end of the day, Atlanta drafted him 8th overall, and we can't ignore that. So, I'm doing my dynasty tiers right now for quarterbacks, and I'm working through not just rookies but all of them. And I have Penix and Bo Nix in the same tier for the same reason. Like, we as armchair GMs might not like Michael Penix and Bo Nix, but at the end of the day, the Falcons and the Broncos did, and they invested in them, and they're going to get opportunities, and we can't ignore that. So what I said in this article that I'm writing right now is that this is just kind of a lesson in abandoning our pre-draft conceptions and realizing that these guys are going to get their opportunity at some point or another, and we can't just simply ignore it. So right now, we're looking at these guys. We have them ranked pretty similarly, kind of as high second round picks. But if you're sitting there at pick 10, maybe even pick 11, and you don't think that Bo Nix or Michael Penix is going to make it back to you in the early second, and you really want this guy, I wouldn't fault anybody for taking Bo Nix or Michael Penix at the end of the first round.
So the one spot where I disagree is I think that we absolutely can ignore draft capital when it comes to quarterbacks, because this is how you end up. I'm not saying that he's a bust right now. Bryce Young was 1 overall over CJ Stroud. People fell into that. You go back a few years before, we're looking at Zach Wilson at 2, Trey Lance at 3, Justin Fields at 11, Mac Jones at 15.
Well, that whole class busted.
but that's my point. It doesn't matter if the whole class did it or if only 2 of them did it. Like this Penix and Bo Nix, just because they went top 12.
And Mac Jones,
if they're not good, they're going to stay.
They still gave him 3 years. Like, they gave him a 3-year audition of being terrible,
but he had no
because they
fantasy
invested
value.
the draft capital in him. So, like, they kept giving him that opportunity, and he could have taken a step forward in year 2, could have taken a step forward in year 3. And I think that actually works in the favor of the argument that I'm trying to make, is that because even despite him being terrible, the Patriots
There was no
kept
fantasy
trotting
value
him
for
out
him,
because
though.
well, that's because he was just bad, and Michael Penix could
But
be
that's
bad,
what I'm saying.
and
Is these guys could be bad,
Jayden
and then the
Daniels
draft
could be
capital
bad.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, and then these guys can be bad. I mean, of course, that's always the risk you take anytime you're drafting anybody in Dynasty League. But also, the investment in the draft capital means that they're going to have a little bit of a longer leash than somebody who was a round 2 pick or something like that. We see it all the time that these round 2 picks might get 2 or 3 games to kind of show out, and if they don't do it, then they're riding the bench for the rest of their career. These guys drafted in the top half of the first round get a 2 or 3 year window to kind of prove themselves.
What does the final thing I'll say with the quarterbacks that could negate the window that we're talking about here too? Terry Fontenot, he did something that was financially very irresponsible when it
Mhm.
comes to Arthur Blank's money, telling him to put $100 million in a quarterback for multiple years, and then your top asset in the draft, you go and you get another quarterback. It's that's hard to explain to an owner. And if the Falcons are not very good this year, Terry Fontenot could be gone, and we're looking at another GM. If Bo Nix doesn't work out and Sean Payton continues to be bad, like, he might not be around either. So there's just we're splitting hairs once again. We're talking about quarterbacks that could be bad and be out of the league in 2 years and get Mac Jones, right? Like
Mhm.
it could very easily happen. I get what you're saying though with the draft capital, is that these guys should have a longer leash. It's a matter of will they actually, especially with a guy like Penix who's not going to be on the field, or a guy like Bo Nix who's in such a bad situation with a coach that I think has had a lot of issues already in Denver. Last guy to take a look at here, and we could have probably lumped him in with the other wide receivers, but I think there's a reason that Xavier Legette is at 17, and I think that a lot of people don't necessarily view him as he's probably not the wide receiver 1 in Carolina. He's probably not as
Carolina's
complete of
got a
a
type, though.
prospect. They do. I mean, why get Jonathan Mingo when we got Jonathan Mingo at home? But here we go. Let's do this. I don't dislike Xavier Legette, but I do think there's enough to be worried about with his profile. And hearing Dave Canales say we're going to use him out of the backfield, we're going to use him on crossers. I get it. I get that we can be gadgety with a guy who's super athletic, but I kind of hate that that's where we're at with the guy who was picked. What was it, 32, 31?
Yeah,
I kind of hate
32,
that
they
that's
traded
where
up
we're
into the
at.
first to get him, so it's,
Yeah, which speaks
yeah.
volume of how much they wanted him, right? Like
Mhm.
that tells us they really wanted him. But these were the same things we were hearing about Kadarius Toney. And I'm not trying to say that they're the same prospects, so don't kill me in the comments. I'm just saying I don't like hearing the gimmicks that we're going to use to get a player the ball when we draft him in the first round. I
Yeah.
want to know if this guy can hit the ground running and make the quarterback better, make the quarterback more comfortable. It almost feels like they're trying to use the quarterback to make the receiver more comfortable here,
Right.
which is why I rank him a little bit lower.
I feel like, Xavier Legette immediately became such a polarizing pick, but I think it's much simpler than people are making it out to be. Yeah, you could plant your flag and say he's going to be good or he's going to be bad. I'm not willing to do that. We just know that this player has a very wide range of outcomes. Maybe he's the next DK Metcalf, which we saw Dave Canales bring out the best in DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
Maybe he's the next Jonathan Mingo and is just too raw and unpolished to do much of anything at all. And that's it. I mean, when you take Xavier Legette at the end of this tier, which I'm totally okay taking, like if he was going in the late first round, I'd be out on Xavier Legette, but you can get him in the middle of the second round. And if it pans out, sweet. He is a giant
Sweet.
freak of nature who can go for 1,400 yards. And if he doesn't, you lit a second round pick on fire. And that's, I think it's as simple as that. He's got a very, very wide range of outcomes. Maybe he pans out, maybe he doesn't. I'm not going to pretend to, plant a flag one way or the other.
Yeah, I would say talent-wise, he's very close to the guys that are ahead of him, Keon Coleman and some of those other guys. Situation-wise, it's not the same. And at least Keon Coleman has a path to being the wide receiver 1 on that team. I don't think Legette has that with Deontay Johnson there. And now
Panthers
this
are
commit
low-key kind of like a decent offense, though. Like, it's not a bad
they
ecosystem
are.
for Bryce Young. Deontay Johnson is wide receiver 1. Legette, they went out and they got Sinnott. They drafted Jonathan Brooks. They've still got Sanders and Chuba Hubbard there to
They
take
di
off
they
the
didn't get
load.
Sinnott. They got
Oh,
Jatavian Sanders,
that's
the
right,
tight end out of
Ja'Tavion Sanders.
Texas.
Exactly. Yeah,
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 yeah.
my bad. But, like, they did what you wanna see a team do around a young
Yes.
quarterback that struggled in
Upgraded
year
the
1, and they
O-line.
surrounded him with talent. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, that says so much more about Bryce Young. Like that's the guy that I've been wanting to get. That's the guy that I've been more comfortable with investing in. And I think Dave Canales can absolutely turn that team around. I don't know how much that is going to involve Xavier Legette, but that's why we have him here at number
Mhm.
17. This ranks the bottom of tier 5 because he's that guy that could be on a very good offense with a smart coach. If this is where you're at and you're at pick 17 and all these other guys are gone, cool. I'm taking Xavier Legette over the guys that we have in this next tier. And let's move on to that one because this is tier 6. And I call this tier There's a World Where, because there's a world where at 18, Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver for the Colts. 19, Roman Wilson, wide receiver for the Steelers. Trey Benson, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. Blake Corum, running back for the Rams. Jalen Polk, wide receiver for the Patriots. And Malachi Corley, wide receiver for the Jets. There is a world where these guys are very fantasy relevant as rookies. If, let's say, the Colts, there's some sort of issue with Michael Pittman, he gets injured, knock on wood, we never want that. Adonai Mitchell has that type of profile where he could be the wide receiver 1 for Anthony Richardson. Roman Wilson is basically Deontay Johnson, but he blocks,
Mhm.
and he'll be good in Pittsburgh as well. And Pittsburgh has a great track record of drafting wide receivers, and that's why we put him at 19. Trey Benson is essentially another James Conner that can come in there and do exactly what Conner's been doing for the Cardinals. Blake Corum is another Kyron Williams for the Rams. This has been a lot of redundancy in this draft, and I kept saying this over and over and over: is why did we need this player when we have this player at home? And we saw that, but there are worlds where these guys become very fantasy relevant. Malachi Corley for the Jets is basically going to be the Randall Cobb for Aaron Rodgers, or at least that's what's
Mhm.
being projected. Jalen Polk is wide receiver going to New England. A lot of people didn't expect him to go that high, but New England has a very, very real plan for him. They want to use him downfield. That's what he was so good at in Washington with Michael Penix Jr. And then you get a guy like Drake Maye who throws downfield so well. There's a world here where each of these guys become very fantasy relevant, Dave.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, this is the point in the draft. There's a huge tier break after the guys that we just talked about. And what is that, pick 18, I believe?
Yeah.
Pick 17. Pick
Yeah,
17, right?
from 17 to 18, there's a bit of a tier break.
Yeah, and these guys are all, I mean, I hate to say it because it's only the middle of, what is this, round 2 here, but, we've
Mhm.
got a pretty it's a top heavy class, and the top
Yes.
of this class is very heavy and very talented. And once you get here, all of these guys are kind of dart throws. Like Adonai Mitchell, Roman Wilson. I think Trey Benson is probably the safest guy that you can draft here, but all of these other guys are
Yeah.
just pure dart throws at this point. And even with Trey Benson, like you're not drafting him for 2024. You're hoping that James Conner leaves and that he can be the guy in 2025. But it's a top heavy draft class, and once you get in the middle of the second round, you're really just kind of hoping for the best with all of these guys. Um, Adonai Mitchell is the one that I think surprised all of us. Like we were
Mhm.
joking during
Every
the
single pick, we were like, maybe this
yeah,
is Adonai Mitchell.
yeah, and he fell all the way to round 4, right? I believe that's what it was, like the top
I
of the
believe
4th round.
it was late round 3 or mid round
All
3.
right. Whatever it was, I mean, it was bad, and I don't think any of us really expected that. He's probably got the highest ceiling of the bunch. Some of the reasons he dropped, character concerns, things like that. And if you look at the day 3 picks or
Don't
the
say
late
character
round
concerns,
3 picks,
man. Don't
I
say
mean,
character concerns. The
that's
Colts
that's
GM is
why.
gonna No, I know, but did you
I
not
heard
see that
Ballard,
with?
yeah. I
Yeah.
saw Ballard kinda going off on a tangent, but at the end of the day, like, they weren't buying into it, but I think a lot of other teams were. And if you look at a lot of the late round wide receivers that have hit historically, Antonio Brown, Tyreek Hill, that's why these guys slid, is because people said, "We
AD
don't want a
Mitchell,
guy
we were
like
way
that on our
off.
team."
We were way off, by the way. AD Mitchell was round 2, pick 20. He just went late round 2.
Oh, well, it
So it's not
felt like
like
he
it's
fell way further than that.
it
Oh, I
felt
was thinking
because I think all of
Troy
us.
Franklin was the one that fell to round 4. That's right.
Yeah, Troy Franklin fell to round 4. I think a lot of us expected AD Mitchell to be a guy that could get
First
taken
round.
by Buffalo early in the first round. So
Yeah.
when he ended up going mid to late second, the fall felt a lot further.
Yeah. Um, all these guys have a ton of upside. I think Trey Benson and Blake Corum are probably the 2 safest guys that you could pick here. But
I
right
kind of
now,
hate.
as it stands in 2024, you need an injury for either of them to really probably be relevant.
Yeah, and I kind of hate that Sean McVay said that what we like so much about Blake Corum is he does everything that Kyron does.
Mhm.
And it's just like, well, dude, what? So then, like, to me, that almost feels like he is exactly the backup. He is exactly the backup for when Kyron goes down, not someone who works in as often. I do think he will work in. I do think he'll get goal line touches. And that'll hurt Kyron Williams quite a bit. And this could be something where Blake is more of the early down back because he's not as much of a pass catcher, and Kyron Williams is a pass catcher. So, but I didn't like, even though their profiles are a little different, I didn't like the fact that Sean McVay said they do a lot of the same things. That usually doesn't bode well, and that kind of annoyed me a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's nearly an impossible situation to predict right now as well.
Yeah,
We assume Kyron has done enough to earn the job, but Blake
they have a new
Corum.
running back every year.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, he really likes to switch it up, and Blake Corum's bigger and faster and stronger, and that's, a little bit concerning here, and Kyron Williams has 2 years left on his contract, and Kyron Williams also has a pretty extensive injury history, and so does Blake Corum. So, I mean, maybe both of these guys benefit from each other if it is just a 50-50 split down the middle. That's not something that we've historically seen Sean McVay do, but it's really, really tough to get a read on this room. But what we do know is that if something happens and Kyron Williams has to miss some time, we're looking at Blake Corum as like a weekly top 3 to top 5 running back. Like, that's how high his ceiling would be
Yeah.
in this offense. So I think that's why you draft Blake Corum, not to say, hey, I'm going to get a season long RB1, but to say if Kyron Williams misses some time, I'm getting a week to week RB1.
I'll say this: the guy that we haven't talked much about yet, Roman Wilson. I'm I'm higher
Great
than
landing
most
spot.
on him.
Great landing
I'm
spot.
higher than most on him. I've got him at 18. Dave, you've got him at 21. I do agree it's a great landing spot, but I also just think he's a good player and he does everything that the Steelers want. Like, this is a high effort guy. I think it feels like they're kind of done with the angry guys. Like, even though George Pickens is still there, it feels like they're kind of done with the diva guys. They want to go and get the yes sir, no sir, very proper, hardworking guys. As they got Russell Wilson at quarterback, they go and get Roman Wilson, who was flying on a plane just to get to school and to practice every day, and he blocks his butt off in games. Like, there's a very different vibe to this pick, and I mean, the Steelers offense might not be good, but the depth chart, there's George Pickens, Van Jefferson,
Johnny
who I didn't
Smith.
even who I didn't even know
Or no,
was
Johnny's
there.
in Miami. That's right.
Denzel Mims,
Yeah.
Quez Watkins, Des
Kelvin Austin, I
Fitzpatrick,
believe.
Calvin Austin is there. Yeah. I don't think Roman Wilson has a whole heck of a lot of competition. I think he's going to be the second wide receiver starting for the Steelers. And I just think that role is going to continue to grow. Like, there's a very real Deontay Johnson role here for Roman Wilson. And when I get to these picks and I'm sitting there around the 18, 19, 20, I do think I agree with you that Trey Benson might be the safest guy there. Blake Corum works as well. I almost start to convince myself that I think I prefer Roman Wilson over a guy like AD Mitchell. And that's why I've got them ranked back to back. I've got them right behind AD Mitchell, but I think there's a lot more safety here with Roman Wilson than people are willing to admit. And I do think that the ceiling might be a little higher than people are willing to admit.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in the draft, I'm not really, and this is just a difference in dynasty philosophy, but I'm not really worried about safety all that much. Like, yeah, there's an easier path to relevancy, but when I get into the middle of round 2 and into round 3, that's when I'm just shooting purely for upside. And like, if everything works out well for Roman Wilson and everything works out well for Adonai Mitchell, I think Adonai Mitchell's ceiling is just so much higher. So that's at this point, I abandon safety, I abandon comfort, and I'm just looking for pure upside.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I do think that the Roman Wilson upside is better than people
Yeah.
think.
Oh, for sure.
I think this is a guy that can be Deontay Johnson.
Mhm.
Whereas I think the upside for Adonai Mitchell is probably George Pickens. Like we're just nonstop talking about Steelers wide receivers. The last guys that are here in this tier, and
Martavis
we'll move
Bryant.
on. Martavis Bryant.
I
Yeah.
think that's a pretty good comp for Adonai Mitchell.
The last guys that are here, Jalen Polk, Malachi Corley. I think it's just knowing that these guys have roles in their offense,
Right.
that these guys are going to be on the field early. That's very different offenses, right? But it's kind of knowing Jalen Polk is going to be the guy that gets moved around the field and used on deep routes for Drake Maye. And then understanding that Malachi Corley is going to be the guy that's getting some of those manufactured plays and getting that Randall Cobb role and playing in the slot and trying to open things up for other players. So that's why I think like they kind of get the last bit of value in this tier and why we take them over our tier number 7. And this tier we called They Could Surprise Us All. And at 24, we've got Jaylen Wright, running back for the Miami Dolphins. 25, Ben Sinnott, tight end for the Commanders. 26, MarShawn Lloyd, running back for the Packers. 27, Troy Franklin, wide receiver for the Broncos. 28, Malik Washington, wide receiver for the Dolphins. 29, Jermaine Burton, wide receiver for the Bengals. And at 30, our final player, Ray Davis, running back for the Bills. Dave, is there a guy in this group that really sticks out to you? Because I know that like you said, as you get later into the drafts, you're saying, I'm going and reaching for the guys that have the potential, the highest ceiling. Who is the guy that sticks out to you here as the highest ceiling amongst these players?
I'm gonna go with here landing spot I think does matter a little bit because that's going to help these guys develop. And the two guys that jump out to me just conveniently both happen to have the same landing spot. I like Jaylen Wright and I like Malik Washington. I think that both of them are in a position where they need somebody on this offense, not named Tyreek Hill and not named Jalen Waddle and not named Devon Achane. They've got these three that are good, but at the end of the day, Raheem Mostert now is probably looking at the end of his career and maybe he's still got some left in the tank. He had injuries that kind of kept him from getting too much tread on his tires in his early years. But I think that Jaylen Wright and Malik Washington, they both have that game breaking speed and they have abilities with the ball in their hands. So even though Malik Washington is a wide receiver by name, they're going to manufacture touches for him. They're going to get him jet sweeps and screens and slants and do whatever they can to get the ball in his hand and let him make plays after the fact. So again, I'm looking for ceiling at this point in the draft, and I think that Jaylen Wright and Malik Washington have the highest ceilings of anybody else available.
Malik Washington is a guy who I know Malachi Corley called himself the Yak King or Yak God or whatever it was. Malik Washington's actually the guy that led the NCAA in yards after contact.
Mhm.
And it's such a perfect fit for what Miami does. And I didn't want to be a homer here and talk up the Miami guys, but that offense is just so good. And Mike McDaniel is so good at getting players to do what they do well. And these guys end up in the perfect system for them, Dave. I absolutely love the two players you picked. Jaylen Wright, many comped them to Raheem Mostert. Malik Washington, he's really in that perfect slot role that Miami has not had a real slot wide receiver. And we know they love to throw the screens. We know that they love the end arounds and jet sweeps and all that. Whenever one of the wide receivers goes down for Miami, whether it's Tyreek or Jalen Waddle, they end up really struggling because they don't have another guy that can step up. And it does happen.
They start
So,
relying on River Craycraft and Braxton Berrios,
yeah,
and that's not
yeah.
where you want to be, right?
Right. And so like I really like those as well. I
Also,
think the
Ray
Marshawn.
Davis, your boy Ray Davis got himself a
Mhm.
nice landing spot, and I know dynasty heads are gonna hate him because he's old, but, Ray Davis, like, of all of the rookie running backs in this class, Ray Davis might have the best 2024 season.
Well, there was a reason that the Bills went out and they signed Damian Harris last year. It
Mhm.
was to have a
They
guy who
don't
could
want
handle the
Josh
goal line
Allen.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, they don't
exactly.
want Josh Allen doing that. They don't necessarily believe that James Cook can be that guy. Now, James Cook was very good, but a lot of what made him fantasy relevant for us was the passing game. That
Yep.
stuff is still going to happen, right? And especially without Stephon Diggs there and Keon Coleman kind of developing. But Ray Davis can do it all for
He
three
can.
downs.
Yep.
And if James Cook misses any time, it almost becomes very similar to like the Blake Corum and Trey Benson stuff where we're saying just give him a shot. And Ray Davis can be really, really good. I know Daniel Jeremiah had him as his running back 3. I had him as my running back 5, if I remember correctly. I was really high on Ray Davis. So to see him here in Buffalo in a good offense that wants to, honestly, that wants to give someone else some goal line opportunities and stop hurting Josh Allen, I do like it. Last guy I want to talk about, Dave, and I'll throw it back to you, is Jermaine Burton. This is a guy that I think you and I are furthest apart on. I've got him as my number 24 player. And Jermaine Burton, he got the round 3 draft capital. He was a guy that I think many people thought could go up as high as where like Jalen Polk did early
Mhm.
second round with the talent. There was some character concern stuff. And I'm not going to get into that. Everyone can go and research it and read it and Google and whatever. I just love the fact that he is now in the Cincinnati Bengals. I love the fact that he goes into that Tyler Boyd role. And if there is no T. Higgins after this season, Jermaine Burton can be that guy. He had one of the best yards per route run and one of the best depth of target amongst in this entire class, if I'm looking correctly. Yeah, and then also too, like Cincinnati, third most pass sets with 3 wide receivers in the NFL last season.
Mhm.
So Jermaine Burton's going to be out there on the field, and I think he's one of those guys that becomes really sneaky as you get towards the end of your second round.
Yeah, he's got a high ceiling for sure, and really it just comes down to me preferring running backs at this point of my rookie
Okay,
draft. And that's really what it is. It's just here's where I do start to think about positions a little bit, and I'll take Ray Davis, and I'll take Isaac Garendo, and I'll take Bucky Irving, and Audric Estime, and Kamani Vidal, and I'll kind of throw my darts at these guys,
I like
knowing that
Vidal.
if they hit, their ceiling is so much higher than almost any wide receiver here. And the difference is, let's say Bucky Irving is the snap leader in week 1 and outscores Rashad White. He instantly is a guy that you could flip for a second round pick, like almost immediately, where
Yeah,
we're going to need to see it
he gets
over
the
time.
Keaton Mitchell treatment.
Exactly, right, and we're gonna need to see, for a guy like Burton, he's still got Chase there, he's still got Higgins there. It's gonna be tough to see him climb in value. I'm almost, the chances of hitting on a Puka Nacua or something like that late in your draft, those guys come around once every half a decade, and you got a 1 in 12 chance of actually hitting on them. And if you hit on them, you're probably just going to sit on it and enjoy the value. But for the most part, when I'm drafting these guys in the late third, fourth round, things like that, I'm looking for a guy that can hopefully give us some flash that I can flip and turn my fourth round rookie selection from 2024 into a 2025 second round pick. So that's why I just skew towards the running backs here, because they're just more likely to boom in value.
Yeah, so it seems like if I'm getting this correctly, as you get later into the draft, your philosophy is more so the guys with the high potential because you can flip them quick for draft capital. You can flip them for value if need be, correct?
Right. Exactly.
And where I lean a little bit more is I think maybe safety is the wrong word, but it's the guys who I know can or will be on the field because that to me tends to be the best path to relevance is the guys because once you get here to this point, it's all a matter of can these guys actually be on the field? Like what gets them there? The third round and the end of the second round in rookie drafts is littered with guys that never amount to anything. So it's
Right.
what can get them on the field early. And I think that's why I lean towards a guy like Jermaine Burton, Ray Davis, these guys later in or in the middle of the third or early third to late second because I think they're going to get on the field early and they have the talent to keep that going.
Mhm.
Well, Dave, we did it. We did our top 30 here, 7 tiers, just nearly an hour. We're going to be back next week. Like I mentioned, we're going to be back on our brand new YouTube channel. Make sure you go and search it. I'm going to put the link in the description of this. It's YouTube. Go and search for Football Guys Fantasy Football. It's that simple. You'll see me and Dave there, Jagger, Joey. We're gonna be doing all of our best ball content throughout the off season here. Where Dave's gonna be having live best ball drafts over there. So make sure you check that out. And once again, I want to remind everybody we've got the giveaway for the Scott Fish Bowl live draft spots in Fort Lauderdale and Denver. Just leave a review on Apple or Spotify and send a screenshot of that review over to abrown@footballguys.com. And we'll announce the winner next Monday on our new channel. For myself, for Dave, thanks for watching and listening all the way through. We'll see you next time. Adios.